color. You're live on the air. Please tell us your name and where you're calling from.
Hi, William. It's Steve from Brooklyn. We see that there's missionaries all over Israel trying to missionize people, trying to dress up as Hasidic Jews and pretend. Well, we've just had a situation here in Arizona, in Phoenix, where a father-son were exposed, and they did all kinds of rituals. They wrote a Sefer Torah, a Torah scroll, which now has to be destroyed, and they wrote tefillin, and they wrote mezuzahs, and they were on the kosher board. They did the ritual for the dead. Unfortunately, we in America always react to things, always one step behind 9/11 or one step behind Pearl Harbor. How do we prevent, what kind of early warning system would the rabbi suggest that we here in America put in place? A system where we don't question every new person that comes in and create a Salem witch hunt and, create some sort of, McCarthy Red Scare. But how do we protect ourselves as an early warning system? What are the dead giveaways that a person is a missionary? How would we ferret one out? That's my question. Thank you.
All right. Well, very good. Go ahead and hang them now to for your answer.
Built into the question is the answer. We're talking about now the Dawsons, but they changed their name to Isaacson. So you have Michael and his wife Summer and son Kalev. And the question is, people just show up in Phoenix and pretend to be Hasidic Jews and writing Torah scrolls and writing ketubas. And how do you know? The answer is they didn't just show up. These covert missionaries, and this is a cancer going on not just in the United States, it's going on here in Israel. You saw the El Cohen case. It's all over the place. And this is a stage 4 cancer. The Dawsons, who look like Hasidim, look like they would be in Meir Sharm or Borough Park. You would never know that these people weren't even Jewish. It just would never occur to you, even though so much research is done. Beyneynu has done amazing research on this, dug up their actual real wedding announcement that goes back to a Lutheran church. The family is not Jewish at all. The Jewish Chronicle in England did research interviewing family members of Michael Dawson. The aunt admits completely these people are completely not Jewish. There's no Jewishness in their family at all. I mean, does this sound familiar? So they didn't just show up in Phoenix and say, hi, everybody. If they had, that question would be a legitimate question. As it turns out, these people were uncovered more than a decade ago. They start out their career in terms of infiltrating covert missionaries. We know for sure, going back to 2010-11, they show up in Portland, Oregon. And in Portland, they engage in some activity of Jewish evangelism. In the Portland Jewish community, there were people who converted to Judaism, meaning left the Messianic movement, left Christianity, recognize them. When they're confronted, they admit to who they are, what they believe, and they skip town. The family skips town and goes to Dallas. They show up in Dallas and always portraying themselves as Jewish, but we're not religious Jews, and we'd like to redo the wedding and have a Jewish ceremony. So the rabbis in Dallas, they're want to help a Jewish couple out, and they manage then to obtain a ketubah, a Jewish wedding contract. So that's now their next stage of evidence that they have that they really are Jewish. Does this sound at all familiar to you? Trying to obtain documents somehow, some way to further support that they're actually Jewish. And then skip town and show up in Houston. They managed to infiltrate the Orthodox Jewish community to a level that's unimaginable, to the point that Michael Dawson is able to be the senior supervisor for the Orthodox Kashrut agency in Houston. Could you imagine that, for Kashrut? And he and his son, they're reading from a Torah scroll. They're involved in also blowing the shofar. They are all over the place in Jewish practice, and all of it's not kosher, all of it's treif, all of it's fake, all of it. They're performing the tahira on the dead, which means that after a person passes away, prior to their burial, the body is washed and so on. There's a series of traditions that are carried out, rituals that are carried out for the dead. This is a highly sacred area. You can't have people who are not Jewish performing this. Now, all this time, the rabbis back in Portland are warning everybody, these are missionaries. These are people who are completely not Jewish. Emails are sent out, forwarded. People are getting their heads up. They passed through Milwaukee, and thank goodness that the Beth Din in Milwaukee took these warnings very seriously, did research, did due diligence on researching the Dawson family. Dawsons, did admit to them that they believe in Jesus and they weren't going to change when confronted. So that's what we're dealing with here. So, look at the way the Milwaukee Beth Din, that means a Jewish court, handled this. They handled this superbly, but unfortunately this was ignored along the way. And then what emerges in Phoenix, thankfully, Beyneynu, a very important organization, receives a tip on their hotline alerting them that the Dawsons are now the Isaacsons, and they're working at a synagogue run by a man named Michal Aminov, and they're running everything there. This thing, that's what you're hearing about. So in Phoenix, they're running everything, doing it all. They're involved in writing ketubot. They got conversions. They're so involved in conversions in Phoenix that in Phoenix, this guy, Aminov, was charging $10,000, $20,000, as much as $50,000 for conversions. For conversions, it was a whole business that Aminov had going on with the now Isaacsons, who are really the Dawsons. There's no charge for joining the nation of Israel. So when you hear those crazy numbers running around, so it's a factory, and that's what was going on in Phoenix. It's a factory. In fact, they were encouraging the community of Phoenix that bring in your ketubot, your marriage certificates. We want to check them to make sure that they're kosher, and if not, we'll fix them. And of course, they were just rendering them not kosher and rewriting them, charging whatever. Reading from Torah, blowing shofar, signing on a divorce certificate, being involved in any way in performing a Jewish get. That's the most serious thing of all. That's the most serious thing of all. Because if Christians write a get, sign on a get, the divorce is worthless. It's nothing. Do you know what the consequences of that is? That's much worse than writing a marriage contract or being a witness on a wedding. Even though this is all shocking, the divorce thing is the most zechamur ma'od. This is the most serious matter, because you allow a missionary to be involved in a divorce certificate, being a witness to a divorce certificate, signing on to a divorce certificate, and the couple then believes that they're no longer a couple. The woman then assumes correctly, she's correct to assume, that she's no longer married, and then she marries another man. She's an Ashes Ish. That's adultery. But she doesn't know. But then if she has a baby with that new husband, so that child's a mamzer. You know how serious that matter is? This is earth-shaking. If you're not blown away by this, then nothing will blow away. So what I'm trying to explain is that running a hechsher agency in Houston, that's pretty serious. But the consequences are that you have to make your utensils kosher, and some things can't be made kosher, and you may wind up throwing away your dishwasher and dishes. But now we're talking about very, very serious crimes, very serious. So that's the problem. The problem is people weren't paying attention. People were ignoring the massive amount of evidence that was coming through and just allowing this to go on. Other rabbis in Phoenix were very, very, and I'm putting this mildly, very, very uncomfortable with that whole so-called synagogue that Aminov was running, and certainly wanted to distance themselves from it. But it really did require this massive explosion of information to be released so that finally, people would stand up and say, okay. Now, it is important for you to know that you might think, though, this is a bunch of strange people. We have all these guys. We got Buckles, we got El Cohen, we have Dawson/Isaacson. This is some sort of anomaly. The idea of casting yourself as Jewish and behaving Jewishly when trying to evangelize Jews goes back to the Christian Bible itself. Paul routinely engaged in this sort of behavior, portraying himself as a Pharisee, not any Pharisee, a Pharisee of Pharisees. In 1 Corinthians chapter 9, verse 20, 21, 22, Paul says, this is how you do your evangelism. To the Jew, I become as a Jew, that I may gain the Jews. If I'm not going to Jews, but rather going to people who are not under the law, non-Jews, so I become as one who's not under the law. I can become all things to all men, that by some means I may gain them for Christ. Paul says that I'm completely chameleon. Whatever it takes, the ends justifies the means. You just dress up and do up and whatever it happens to be, and whatever it is, whether in pretense truth, the gospel is preached, Philippians chapter 1, verse 18. I mean, this is not a new idea. The answer to the question is just pay attention. There is an enormous difference between if somebody shows up who appears to be Jewish and you're asked to count that person for a minyan, for a quorum in a synagogue, to slaughtering animals, to being a supervisor in kashrut, to reading a Torah scroll. In Jewish law, you have to certify that these people are known to be Jewish. And to slaughter animals, to be a shochet, a ritual, that person requires it's an enormous, very high bar, very high standard that a person has to pass to be able to be a shochet, a ritual slaughter. It can't just have any person do it, and it can't be an irreligious Jew. It has to be someone who is known to be not just a Yir Shemayim who fears heaven, but is very knowledgeable in Jewish law and in Jewish scriptures and Jewish sacred literature. When people are coming into the community and asking for new documents, they don't have them. Ask questions. When people are portraying themselves in a way that just doesn't make any sense, it's vital to take a closer look at what they're saying. If they're seen in the Messianic congregations, that's an enormous red flag. Pay careful attention to that. Don't ignore what people are telling you, because all these cases were known to people, but people somehow went silent, went quiet. And when a Beth Din from another city, when leaders of another city are coming to you and letting you know that, don't ignore that. A disproportionate number of the people who are converting to Judaism today, and the numbers are huge, they're coming through the evangelical Christian world. When these people warn you, take them very seriously.
אדון עולם אשר מלך בטרם כל יציר נברא